Well, this is Dave Gaddis, and today is May 12th, 2015, and today we're talking to Kent Marsh in his office here in Houston. So welcome, Kent.
Good morning.
Why don't we start at the very beginning and tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in Corpus Christi, Texas in 1950 in August. Surprisingly enough, the same month as Whataburger of Texas was born. And so I always use their advertising for my anniversary. I was born in Corpus at Memorial Hospital. Lived there for a couple of years and grew up in Victoria, Texas.
Okay, and so what did your parents do that had you in Corpus and Victoria?
My father was an insurance salesman, and my mother was a stay-at-home, very young mom. Okay. And we moved to Kingsville a couple of years later. Lived there for about another year and a half, 2 years. My brother was born. And then we moved to Victoria for most of our younger life until we were in high school.
Okay, and where did you go to high school?
Went to high school for 2 years in Victoria at Victoria High School, home of the Fighting Stingarees, which no longer exist, unfortunately. And then finished my high school in Vidor, Texas.
Okay, and so where did you go to college?
Well, I was in Beaumont at the time, so I thought that Lamar University might be a good spot to start. So I started 2 years at Lamar University in physics. Okay. I had a wonderful time in physics in high school and thought that was just what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And about 2 years after my college beginnings, and I had not yet passed my first physics course in college, I thought maybe it's time for a change. So I took a quick look at myself and what I like to do and decided that I like to do things with my hands and build things, and I was pretty good in art and visualization, so I thought, you know, architecture would be a good thing. So I looked around a little bit, and lo and behold, there was no architecture program at Beaumont. So fortunately, my mother and father, who were divorced at the time, my father lived in Houston, so that allowed me to move to Houston and transfer to the University of Houston architecture program, which I did for about 2 years, the next 2 years until I was married in 1971.
Okay. Did you graduate from the University of Houston?
I did. I kept going to school full-time, and actually got my first working position with an urban planning firm in my sophomore year at the University of Houston. So I worked full-time, and I took a full course load for a 5-year professional degree at University of Houston, a Bachelor's of Architecture.
Okay, and so who did you work for while you were in school?
Surprisingly enough, I worked for a planner, not an architect. Kind of a little quirky story into how I got my first job. I was in Houston and had just been married and decided, well, you know, my wife's got a job. It's time for me to get a little job and get a little exposure to the working world. I knew not a single soul in Houston except my father and a couple of students. So I wanted to take time to get a job. I said, well, so where's the best source for architects? Because I need to be working for an architect since I'm going to get a degree in architecture. Well, it's got to be the Yellow Pages, right? So I turned to the page in the Yellow Pages in Houston at the time. There was one full page of architects. I closed my eyes and I pointed. I said, that's the one. So I called the phone number. It happened to be Charles Ligon, who's still a good friend of mine. And I said, Mr. Ligon, I'm looking for a job as an architect. Do you have any opportunities there? He said, no, I don't, but I do know of someone who's looking for someone. He's not in architecture, but close. So I gave him a call, and it was Vernon Henry. I talked with Mr. Henry. I said, Mr. Henry, I'm an architecture student at the University of Houston. I'm looking for a part-time job. Do you have any openings? He said, well, actually I do. We've just moved to a new office, and I've expanded a little bit, and I'm looking for someone. Why don't you come down and talk? Well, this was Friday morning, so Friday afternoon I went down to his office. It was a new office close to the Galleria in Houston. I looked inside, and they were still painting on the walls inside the office. I thought, wow, this is sort of a ground floor opportunity here. I was an architecture student, but I didn't take any of my architecture examples, my samples or anything. You know, you got portfolio, all these kinds of things you've drawn. Didn't take any of that. Just walked in, went to the conference room, we started talking. He said, well, at the end of the interview, he said, sounds like this is something that might work together. How soon can you start? I said, well, this is Friday. How about Monday morning? Not a problem. So I went to work for Vernon Henry at Vernon Henry Associates with Vernon and Mary Lou in 1972, and I stayed there for 17 years as their ultimately being the senior planner there at the firm. Learned a lot. Really thankful that I had that opportunity.
So, just out of curiosity, did you ever practice architecture, or did you end up doing just planning and urban design?
Actually, I did a little bit of practicing on the side, but it was sort of the restoration remodeling type of architecture, just to sort of keep my skills handy more than anything else. But as a urban planner, I learned very quickly that urban planning and architecture are very similar. It's just a difference in scale. And most of the things that you look at and work on and do related to a building also apply on a larger scale in urban planning. You have access issues, you have utility issues, you have people, space issues, those kinds of opportunities. So there's not much difference between architecture and urban planning in that perspective than the scale itself.
Okay. And did the University of Houston offer any planning courses, or was it all architecture?
No, there was not many planning courses back in those days. There was actually a planner who was on the staff at the University of Houston, but Vernon Henry and several other planners in the area were sort of adjunct semi-professionals that were in the area of trying to teach at the same time when they were asked. So it was sort of an as-you-needed type relationship. But it was mostly architecture. There was very little urban planning, but my thesis was actually in floodplain development, so it was in urban planning.
Okay. So what kinds of projects did you do for Vernon Henry?
We did a lot of private development, no public work per se, but a lot of private development in the single-family master plan community realm. I think I have probably planned more than 150,000 acres of land in my short career. And because of that, I've learned a lot related to people, spaces, and how people live and act and work and play and those kinds of issues. But we had major projects that were 5,000 acres or larger, for instance, the Cinco Ranch. And we also had very small individual projects close to downtown, individual lots. So the size ranged from those kinds of directions to complexities to issues related to ownerships and how do you divide out ownerships and figure out from a planning perspective what kind of property values are in raw land based on what could be done as opposed to what's there nowadays. And I learned a lot of experience, had got a lot of experience in the creative side of planning, of land planning, and how to deal with a blank piece of paper. I had a question about 6 months ago from the president of Friendswood Development when I was being interviewed for potential work with that company. He asked the question, well, you know, there just aren't very many of you around that can still design subdivisions. And he said, what's going to happen when you guys are gone and not doing what you're doing? I said, I'm not really sure. I'm not really teaching anybody to do what I do. I hope that somebody will eventually do that, but it's one of those things where the most difficult part of my life is trying to explain to others about having a blank piece of paper and making a decision that creates lifestyles for people, and that's what I do.
And that was all before computers, too.
All before computers, all hand-drawn. I've told mentees in my presence many, many times, the first thing you need to learn after you get to college is get a skill. Because if you have a skill that's sellable and usable, then you have a job. And once you have your foot in the door, you can make whatever type of career you want to out of it. But always have a skill. My skill, fortunately, I was self-taught, but I had a little bit of direction from Vernon Henry of doing a very good printing style so that I could print very cleanly, very neatly, very by hand, obviously, because everything back in those days was done by hand. I can remember the first computer drawing that I saw. I said, wow, that's amazing. But what do you do when you change the size or the angle? So Yes, it's quite a range of technology in my career.
Okay. Why don't you talk a little bit about Vernon and Mary Lou as teachers and as bosses?
You bet. I am always thankful that I had that opportunity to be under the guise of Vernon Henry and Mary Lou Henry, because I learned quite a bit from both of them, from both a personal standpoint about how to deal with people and how to be with people and how to understand people and how to question people, to learn what their needs were and how to address those needs, but also from a very professional standpoint of where do you go in your career and how do you get there and what do you do and who do you meet and why do you do it. It was just a continual mentoring process. We never really called it that when I was working with them, but I was always learning and they were always teaching.
Anybody else at Vernon Henry and Associates that you worked with over the years?
I worked with several landscape architects, and I learned a lot about the natural environment from both of those gentlemen.
And who were they?
Mike Ilse and I'm not remembering the other one, sorry.
Okay. It happens to the best of us.
Carol Kell, that's who it was. Carol Kell and Mike Ilse. Mike passed away several years back, and Carol, I think, is still alive and semi-practicing.
Okay. So working with them for 17 years put you in the late 80s. What made you decide to go somewhere else?
Well, I had basically risen to a level within that company that I felt like that I could stay the rest of my life if I wanted to, or I could try to strike out on my own and see what else was out there. So I decided to strike out on my own under very good, pleasant relationship and leaving. I started my own company and just enjoyed being out by myself for a little while. It didn't take me long before other companies found out about my existence and wanted me to be a part of their firm. About 2 years after I started my firm, having a pretty good successful practice, a small engineering firm, Hewitt Zollers. You probably know Hewitt Zollers in Dallas.
They're not small anymore.
Well, they weren't small then. They had 15 offices then. Decided that they wanted to have a Houston office, and a good civil engineer friend of mine, David Hamilton, and I were asked to start up the office, the Houston branch of Hewitt Zollers for that company, and we did so. We're very successful for about 8 years. I was vice president of planning, in charge of the planning portion of that office. And at that point then, things got different, and we parted ways with Hewitt Zollers and decided to go back and try another engineering firm, which was okay for a couple of years, or actually it was about 6 months. Then, seemed like a couple of years. Then Patty Knudsen Joyner decided that she needed my expertise. So I joined that firm in 2001. Stayed there for about 6 years until 2007. And then Sue Darcy and I, who both worked at Knudsen and Associates, decided that we both wanted to be out on our own for a while and would be nice to be together. So we co-formed Marsh Darcy Partners, and that's where I've been ever since, and I have never looked back.
Let's go back to when you were on your own right after Vernon Henry and Associates. Any particular projects during that couple of year period that stand out? Nothing
major, mostly small stuff. A lot of my expertise revolved around knowledge of the regulations for development within the city of Houston and in the ETJ, and a lot of my work was fixing little small things that needed to be fixed. Nothing really big happened during those 2 years.
Okay. How about with Hewitt Zollers?
Again, a lot of smaller projects in the 5 to 10 to 15 to 20 acre size, but nothing really major. I was very comfortable in just addressing the needs for clients at that point in time. We got into some larger projects in Northwest Houston later on, but most of it was just day-to-day planning activities that made people happy.
And mostly private sector clients? Any public
Yes.
sector clients?
I never have gotten into the actual public sector clients until Sue and I started our firm.
Okay.
Because most of it's a very different side of the fence, as you well know. On the public sector side, we were at Knudsen and Associates. We had just started delving into preparing comprehensive plans and did our first comprehensive plan originally when we were with Knudsen, and then when we transferred to Marsh Darcy, we took over that work with Knudsen. But that's kind of my first realm into the public sector side, and I've been very successful in expanding that. Currently, we're the planner for the city of Iowa Colony, and we have several other cities that call on us to provide them with planning services, which includes all the way from reviewing of their subdivision plats that come in to preparing particular issues related to dumpsters, comprehensive plans, major thoroughfare plans, whatever their needs may be related to planning. We are their planner, and we do that for the city.
Okay. Any significant projects at Knudsen that you worked on that you're particularly proud of?
The master plan that we did, the comprehensive plan we did for the city of Manville, was a very large endeavor, and I learned quite a bit about the range of master planning and comprehensive planning in that endeavor. And to this day, it's still used extensively. It is and was at that point a pretty advanced document related to the beginnings of form-based coding and form-based zoning in a very simplistic sort of introductory type manner.
Okay. And any other people at Patty's firm that stand out?
Oh, well, there have been several that have come and gone. One in particular is Tom Northrup. You probably know Tom. Tom and I have worked together. Actually, we worked together at Vernon Henry Associates for a while, and then after I left Knudsen, Tom joined Knudsen Associates. So that's a relationship that I've always enjoyed during my lifetime with Tom.
Let's talk a little bit about APA. When did you first get involved with APA, and why? I'm assuming it was the Henrys that got you involved.
Oh yes, oh yes. As you know, Vernon and Mary Lou were very involved in the American Institute of Planners. Vernon was chapter president of the Southwest chapter, and when that process started relating to the change of AIP and another organization together into a new organization, the American Planning Association. I happened to be at Vernon Henry at the time, and I was just a pup planner. Decided, well, you know, I need to make my mark and I need to join my professional organization, and lo and behold, they're changing organizations. So I became a member of the American Planning Association. Actually, I'm a charter member in 1978.
So were you an associate member of AIP before you joined?
I was not.
Okay.
I was still trying to get my time for the professional certification process, and during that time frame, it changed from AIP to APA and AICP. Okay. So I never really was involved in AIP per se. I've always been involved from an APA and AICP from the beginning.
Do you remember when you took the AICP exam?
Yes, I do. In 1980. I took it in August of 1980, and I'm sorry, I took it in May of 1980 and became a member in July of 1980. I'm actually member number 3596, which today there are 5 and 6 digit member numbers, and I have a 4-digit number, so you can tell you how many years I've been an AICP planner.
Okay. And did you ever get involved in the local section?
Yes, I did. From very early on, one of the things that Vernon and Mary Lou impressed upon me was become involved in something that's passionate for you, and planning was passionate for me at that point and still is. So I thought that, you know, it'd be a good idea to help others and learn others and be with others in the planning profession. So from the very beginning, I was always a part of the APA Houston section to some extent, all the way through to section director in the middle 80s. So I've always been involved and have tried to give back a little bit with my experience and my expertise to others.
Okay. Did you ever do any other offices besides section, or?
Never went to the chapter level. Always enjoyed the local relationships because that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, and that's where I feel like people learn more from each other is in the local relationships. And so I always stayed with the section, even though I had many opportunities to go further up and go in that direction. I've been involved in chapter activities, but not really been involved in the actual officers of the section of the chapter.
Okay. But as a section director, I guess you were on the chapter board.
Yes.
In that capacity.
Yes, and I was involved in the chapter relationships during that year time frame.
Okay.
But never really had any desire to become chapter treasurer or secretary or chapter president.
Did you ever get involved in any of the chapter conferences that was in the Houston area, or did you get involved with that?
Always have been involved with volunteering and helping on whatever it may be, either the program or the mobile workshops or whatever. We haven't had many conferences in Houston, but we had several in state conferences in Galveston. I've been involved in those up until this year, as a matter of fact, trying to get some support from people to be involved in that kind of activity, because that's where we planners learn more from each other.
Okay. Well, one thing I noticed is beyond AICP, you went ahead and got the advanced certification exam in urban design, and you want to talk a little bit about that, when that happened?
I've always felt like that when I stopped learning, it was time to put away my tools. So I've always read on planning activities in the APA Journal and gone to national conferences to keep up with what the latest and greatest techniques and planning ideas are. So when AICP came out with the first two advanced certifications in transportation and environmental, I thought, well, you know, I'm not really an environmental planner, I'm not really a transportation planner. I'll just set that aside for a while. But last year, when they decided for a third specialization in urban design, I felt like I had potentially the possibilities of knowing a little bit about urban design over 40 years experience and working in an urban environment. So I applied. I said, you know, nothing venture, nothing gain. So I wrote my essays, and lo and behold, I was accepted to take the exam. I learned in the next 6 months a lot about the realm of urban design that I was not familiar with at all, based on the books and the sources that were on the website in the AICP. And I thought, well, you know, I've got maybe a fighting chance of passing the exam. I'll go ahead and take it and see what happens. So I took it, and lo and behold, I passed. So I was pleasantly surprised, not amazed, but pleasantly surprised. And then I found out that not only had I passed the exam, but I was the only Texan that applied for and was accepted to take the exam, and the only Texan that passed the exam. So at this point in time, I'm the first and only certified urban designer in AICP in the state of Texas.
Okay, well, congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's not for my own personal pride. It's for the company more than anything else, to provide the company with a little bit of expertise and marketing ability to say, you know, we've got the only certified urban designer in the state of Texas that works in our firm.
So on some of your projects in your current firm, including comprehensive planning, are you incorporating more urban design, or you briefly mentioned form-based codes? Are you doing a lot of form-based codes?
I'm not doing a lot of it, but I'm incorporating in all of those issues into just about everything that I do. The creativity part of it is very important, but also the technical side and the ability to create spaces for people is very important. And that's always entering into my mind when I'm doing subdivision design or comprehensive plans or even major thoroughfare plans of how people live and work and play, and what makes them happy in those endeavors and what makes them safe in those endeavors.
Are you also active in the Congress for the New Urbanism?
Somewhat. I attend some of their meetings. The local group is not very active. They're somewhat active, and they're very on the avant-garde urbanism approach. Mine's a little more mediocre in that regard. I appreciate some of the concepts and the ideas, but I'm not really sure I'm ready to implement a lot of those at this point in time.
Did you happen to go to the meeting in Dallas a week or so ago?
I did not, no.
Just checking. Are any other professional organizations that you're actively involved with? Or?
I'm a member of the Greater Houston Builders Association. Have always been a member of that organization. I appreciate the ability to build things and be able to actually put something on the ground after you see it on a piece of paper. So that's kind of the implementation part of the process that I like to be involved with. And it's important to understand the true development, the economics of the true development process, and that's where I learned those kinds of issues.
Any other non-professional organizations, social service or charitable organizations you gotten involved with? Or?
Yes, I've always been involved, as my wife says, more than I should be, in volunteering and providing planning services to organizations, and in addition to that, being able to be involved in the Boy Scouts of America. This year is my 50th year as an Eagle Scout, and I'm very appreciative of that program, and I'm very supportive of that program as to an ideal process for young men and young ladies to learn more about life and the realisms in life and how to deal with natural environments and leaderships and those kinds of things. So I've been involved in the local council for the last almost 40 years to some extent, either as Eagle Scout Board of Review Chairman, or currently I'm the district chairman for the Skyline District, and it encompasses an area just basically inside the loop of the city of Houston. But it's a pretty good sized area and lots of people and lots of scouting programs that need to be coordinated, and that's my job this year. I'm also a Freemason. I've been a Freemason for 28 years now, and I enjoy and try to attempt to understand Masonry's philosophy of life and live that philosophy. It's a lot like scouting, surprisingly enough. The ideals, the 12 points of the Scout Law, are part of the philosophy of Masonry too. So those two work well hand in hand. The main impetus of both of them is the ability to give back to others, to be truthful, to be honest, and to be straightforward. And I try to live that kind of lifestyle. Try to set the example. I tell people that I try to lead my life by example, and hopefully that gives them an example to follow.
Well, speaking of examples, you've kind of alluded to some mentors in your career over the years. You talked about the Henrys. Any other mentors that stand out to you?
A couple of the planning directors for the city of Houston, Marlene Gaffrick to some extent, and those people. Peter Brown is another good example of a mentor that I look up to some extent. Shafiq Rafat, who is a planning professor at the University of Houston and has his own firm here in Houston, is a person that I look up to some extent. So there are a lot of planning people that I try to emulate, and there are a lot of personalities that I try to emulate from a very positive standpoint.
And of course, the flip side is, are there proteges or mentees that you've kind of helped shepherd that you're particularly proud of that you want to talk about?
Well, I've never really thought of myself as a mentor. I've always just tried to live my life as an example, and hopefully that people will see that and try to follow. But recently I've been asked and have been involved. I guess as you live a little bit longer, you get involved in more things in a mentor program, both in the section and in the chapter. So I'm actually in two groups right now. One is a one-on-one that I mentor Andrew Pompey, who works for the Houston-Galveston Area Council. He's a young planner, just getting into the profession, very intelligent and very open-minded about the planning profession and how he can be involved in that. So we meet on a monthly basis, and sort of I share with him and shepherd him in my experiences in planning and with people and relationships, etc. But I'm also involved in a very rewarding group with the chapter of 5 other planners in the area, planning students and young planning professionals. And I've enjoyed recently being able to take them out on little field trips here and there to some of the better urbanized places in Houston that gives them a feeling, a real comfort level and a feeling about how spaces really feel and what's good about a space and what's an issue with a space that needs to be corrected. So we've been to places like the Post properties in Midtown and enjoyed that kind of relationship from the space itself. We've been to the West Ave project on Westheimer and Kirby Drive, seen the differences there and the more urbanized character. And recently we went to the city of Sugar Land's town center, and sort of dissected what the feelings were with that particular space. So I enjoy helping people understand what their feelings are. A lot of people understand or feel that some place feels good to them or it doesn't feel good to them, but they don't really know why. So I try to help them understand by giving them examples of ranges of what this can do for them, what that space really means as far as a physical dimension or a physical character or a physical form. So had a really interesting field trip recently with the chapter mentor group. Included 15 A&M planning students, Texas A&M planning students, who came from College Station down to Houston about 2 weeks ago. 13 of them had never ridden on a light rail. So one of our field trip examples for the day was we started out with the City of Houston Planning Department downtown and learned a lot about the general plan process that the City of Houston is going through now. And then we walked over a couple of blocks to the Red Line, the main rail in Houston. Took the rail down to a restaurant in Midtown, had a wonderful meal, lunch in the restaurant. It's a repurposed restaurant right there on the rail line at the Ensemble HCC rail stop. And it was really fascinating to watch them try to figure out how to get a rail ticket, or which one do you take, how do you get there. So it's just really interesting to see a fish out of water trying to learn about urbanized planning. And then we had an interesting conversation with Christoph Spieler related to his relationship with Metro Board. He's a Metro Board member, and the new and exciting things that are happening to transit in Houston. The other 2 lines, the purple and green line, opening up this month and giving us an east-west transit system to tie into the north-south that we've had for the last 10 years. And the bus system is being completely changed to a grid demand system as opposed to a centroid downtown system that we've had in the past. So a lot of things are happening in transportation, and those 15 A&M planning students got to learn it firsthand from the people that actually are doing it. So I was very proud to have that ability to sort of lead them around and show them the things that are the great things of Houston.
If you had any advice to give to a planner right out of school, what would it be?
Well, first thing would be get a skill, and then it would be get a job, and don't be too displeased with whatever job you get. It's always the starting point that makes the most important thing, getting that experience of just having a work relationship. And after you've been there a while, decide if you really have the passion for that. If you do, stick with it, and if you don't, find some other job. I'm a firm believer in that if you're not happy with what you're doing, you should be doing something else.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to sort of thank the direction that I've taken to the people involved and entities involved in First of all, I want to thank God for all the opportunities that I've had and all the angels that He has around me. I have had many opportunities to go off the path, and I think that I've been pushed in certain directions. I teach a Sunday school class in church frequently, and I'm always reminding them that I'm not a believer in coincidence, that things happen for a reason. And that I'm always thankful that I've had that opportunity. I want to thank my wife, who's put up with me for, 43 years now, and my only child, my daughter, Alyssa, and most importantly, the three grandchildren that I have, 2 grandsons and a granddaughter, Caleb, Lily, and Ethan. So it's I've had a wonderful opportunity, and I appreciate having that. It's been one of those things where you look back and all of a sudden you're called mature, and you're called knowledgeable, and you're called experienced, and you wonder, well, so when did that happen? And I'm not really sure when it happened for me, but it's good to be in a position where you can help other people, and that's been my goal all of my life, is to try to help other people and help them become what they want to become.
Just out of curiosity, did your daughter go into planning?
Well, yes and no. With 3 children, she has to plan her life quite a bit, but not professionally. She went to A&M, woof, and has a degree in psychology. That's good because she has 3 wonderful children, and they really test her psychological skills.
Well, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, I wanted to thank you for spending some time with us this morning.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure to be in planning. I've always thought about what would I do otherwise, and I couldn't think of anything else. I like to tinker with the cars, and I like to garden, and I like to do things around the house and build things, but when I come to work and I want to do something for others, I think about planning.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thanks.